Everything you ever knew about The Lord of the Rings is a lie. Why did Peter Jackson change so much from the books? Keep watching to find out. Perhaps the biggest misconception regarding the world of Middle-earth is that hobbits are, as a race, pretty weak. Sure, Bilbo and Frodo are heroic, but most fans think of them as exceptions from the norm. However, the truth is that hobbits can be quite sturdy and quite fierce. This is most evident in a key part of The Return of the King that is actually omitted from the cinematic adaptation, where a depowered Saruman leads a group of human ruffians to take over the Shire. When Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin return home, they lead a revolt and drive off the humans. In fact, when nearly 100 humans come to try to reclaim the Shire, 70 of them are killed in combat with the hobbits, many of them cut down by axes. Why then did Peter Jackson omit this from his hit movie, other than a brief glimpse in a vision during the Fellowship of the Ring? It's possible that the universe would collapse under the weight of yet another ending being added to that movie, so the hobbits get a more traditional happy ending. One of the misconceptions about The Lord of the Rings is that Samwise Gamgee is little more than a source of comedic relief and funny memes.
Potatoes! Boil 'em, mash 'em, stick 'em in a stew.
However, the most badass Samwise Gamgee moment is one that is very easy to miss. When Sam thinks that Frodo has been killed by Shelob, the giant spider, Sam takes the ring to continue the quest alone. If that wasn't badass enough, once he saves Frodo, he just gives the ring back. Why is this a big deal? There are almost no other instances of the ring being freely given away. Remember, it's a huge deal when Bilbo does it at the start of the trilogy, and at the end of the tale, Gollum inadvertently saves the day when he nibbles it off of Frodo because, as it turns out, Frodo himself was unable to willingly give it up. A common criticism of Lord of the Rings is the fact that Gandalf didn't just summon some of those giant birds to carry the Fellowship to Mordor. The truth is that using the great eagles in that way was never an option. First, there's no reason to think Sauron wouldn't be ready for an enemy to approach Mordor from the air. Remember all those Nazgul on their big dragons? Until Sauron was defeated, the eagles couldn't easily get into Mordor. Second, it's a flawed assumption that Gandalf could summon the great eagles at will. Gandalf did not summon the great eagles, they came of their own accord. Tolkien often portrays animals in his stories as being blessed with as much intelligence as humans. As early as the Great Eagle's first appearance in The Hobbit, writer J.R.R. Tolkien made it clear that the great eagles did not like most two-legged things and would rarely get involved with them. They respected Gandalf and would occasionally help him, but they were never at his command, even to save Middle-earth from Sauron. Another misconception about Lord of the Rings that can be blamed entirely on the movies is that losing the ring leads to instant aging.
You haven't aged a day.
This is dramatized by the extreme contrast of Bilbo's relative youth at the beginning of the first movie, when he is celebrating turning 111 years old, and his extremely elderly appearance when they encounter him in Rivendell. Now, the movies are deliberately cagey about the timeline, but the books tell us that 17 years pass between that birthday celebration and Frodo's quest. And then more years pass after the quest before Bilbo's ship leaves. In that time, Bilbo has seemingly aged quite a few decades, leading some fans to conclude that losing the ring caused him to age. However, this is canonically the opposite of the truth, and we know this because of Gollum. Gollum was pushing 600 years old by the time he died, and he had been without the ring for over 60 years by the time that happened. If losing the ring leads to the body's age catching up, Gollum should have been dust well before the Fellowship of the Ring even began. Among die-hard Lord of the Rings fans, there are 4 words almost guaranteed to instigate a blind rage: Elves at Helm's Deep. This, of course, was a major part of the climax of the Two Towers movie, with a small company of elves arriving to help the beleaguered humans drive off an entire host of invading orcs. And because these are adaptations of a beloved series of books, many people figured this, too, was in the books. But not only was this event not in the books, it was canonically impossible in the books. Peter Jackson made the bold decision to start his film adaptations by showing audiences a pivotal moment in the history of Middle-earth: humans and elves standing together to defeat Sauron. This was notable not just because they defeated Sauron, but because this was the last alliance between the two races. They went back to each doing their own thing, and by the time the main events of the modern plot unfold, the elves are fading in prominence from Middle-earth. Remember, it's actually a major plot point that big, important Elrond has assembled a team of humans, hobbits, a dwarf, and a wizard. The elves are supposed to be leaving this world behind and letting the mortal races deal with their own problems. So having elves show up at Helm's Deep violates a major theme of the entire series. While books are perfect places for allusions and metaphors, it is the job of the movie to visually spell everything out. Peter Jackson took his role very seriously when it came to Return of the King, leading to one of our primary misconceptions, that Sauron is a giant eyeball. When audiences first see Sauron, he is a towering warrior in the flashback battle sequence at the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring. When they next see him, though, he is seemingly a giant eye, one that Aragorn resolves to distract with a flashy battle sequence while Sam and Frodo finish their task. This giant eyeball is a creation made especially for the movies, and it makes many people think that the eye is literally Sauron. However, Tolkien's own letters clarify that Sauron had a physical body by the time the ring was physically destroyed, something hinted at in the Hobbit prequel films. Thanks to Viggo Mortensen and the face that launched 1,000 fanfics, it's easy to take Aragorn's age for granted. After all, Mortensen was 43 years old when Fellowship of the Ring came out, and it seemed a reasonable age for a seasoned warrior who can still kick orcish ass. However, the character of Aragorn is supposed to be twice that age at the time of their adventures. There's even a deleted scene where Eowyn is highly confused when Aragorn tells her that he fought in battle alongside her grandfather.
Then you must be at least 60. 70? You cannot be 80.
So what's up with this exceptionally old age? Aragorn was not like mortal men, as he was Isildur's heir, was the last of the Númenóreans, a group of humans with exceptionally long life whose homeland was destroyed in an Atlantis-style cataclysm long ago. This is part of the tragic history the character often bears with him, and is part of his concern that he may repeat some of the same errors that his ancestors did. One of the most powerful moments from Return of the King is when Eowyn, the Shield Maiden, defeats the Witch King. The Witch King feels quite confident because of a prophecy that no man can kill him, at which point Eowyn, disguised as a male warrior, reveals that she is a woman and stabs him in the face.
I am no man.
But Merry deserves just as much credit. Before Eowyn gets her awesome killing stroke in, audiences see Merry stab the Witch King with his blade. The movies gloss over the importance of these blades, with Aragorn simply handing them out at Weathertop. The books, however, made clear that Merry's blade was forged with magical enchantments, specifically made to hurt the Witch King. Thus, Merry happens to stab the Witch King with one of the only weapons that can hurt him, opening the door for Eowyn to complete the prophecy. Gandalf is a wizard, yes, but he's actually not the kind of wizard we're used to. Gandalf isn't a wizard in the same way that, say, Harry Potter is a wizard. He's not someone who showed aptitude for magic as a child, and so was sent to some wizard school and given a big tome and taught a bunch of spells. No, Gandalf was created as a wizard and sent to Middle-earth to protect it. The Valar were essentially the gods of Middle-earth, and they sent Gandalf there, along with Saruman, Radagast, and 2 other wizards. These 5 wizards acted as agents of the gods. They were made to look human and given magical and physical abilities beyond normal men. They existed for millennia, even longer than the Elves. This is why Gandalf knows so much. It's why no matter where the Fellowship goes, he's already been there and always seems to know someone. He's been alive long enough to travel to every corner of Middle-earth and back again hundreds of times over. And it's why, after he dies during his battle with the Balrog, Gandalf returns to life, because the gods resurrected him to complete his mission to redeem the world from the devil called Sauron. Denethor was portrayed as a vengeful and cowardly madman in Peter Jackson's Return of the King. John Noble played Denethor to perfection, but there was a lot of information missing from the movie that would have added more depth to the character. In the novel, Tolkien makes it clear that Denethor was actually driven mad by an outside magical influence, by a Palantir. This is the same sort of magic orb that also corrupted Saruman and almost possessed Pippin, as it opens the user to Sauron's influence. While Denethor ultimately failed as steward, his fall is tragic. He was the leader of a besieged kingdom searching for a way to stop an unbeatable enemy. He failed, and the consequence was madness, but he went mad trying to save his people, and that's got to count for something. Peter Jackson's adaptation of Return of the King may give you the impression that Gondor was the only place where Sauron's armies laid siege, but that was far from true. This is alluded to briefly in the extended version of Return of the King when Legolas tells Gimli he believes the dwarves are busy with their own battles, but we don't hear any specifics. The appendices of Lord of the Rings make it clear that at the same time Sauron's armies were smashing into the walls of Minas Tirith, the elves, dwarves, and other humans of Greater Middle-earth were dealing with their own invasions. Sauron's armies in Dol Guldur, the abandoned city where Gandalf, Saruman, and Galadriel encounter Sauron in the Hobbit movies, attacked Lorien 3 times. Once Sauron was finally defeated, Galadriel traveled to the city and destroyed it. The Wood Elves were also waging war against the orcs in their own forests, and eventually they managed to expel them. The humans of Dale, the city at the foot of the Lonely Mountain in The Hobbit, weren't as successful as the elves, though they were aided by the dwarves. Sauron's armies attacked Dale and overwhelmed its defenders. Humans and dwarves alike took shelter in the Lonely Mountain, and the orcs laid siege to its gates. Once the One Ring was destroyed, the combined armies of humans and dwarves were able to rout the orcs, but not before both the human and dwarven kings were killed. Though he ultimately betrays Frodo and the Fellowship after being corrupted by the One Ring's power, Tolkien makes it clear in his novel that Boromir is actually a noble warrior. He's one of the most skilled swordsmen in the Fellowship, and possibly the strongest. In battle scenes, he performs better than most, with the possible exception of Aragorn. He's flawed, but he's not the mess of nerves Peter Jackson depicted in Fellowship of the Rings. Except for his last stand, Boromir is hardly seen in Jackson's Fellowship battle scenes, but the extended edition of the film revealed a number of cutscenes and lines that showed him in a better light. In a Lothlorien scene, for example, when the rest of the Fellowship is silent, Boromir is the only one to reach out and tell Frodo not to blame himself for Gandalf's presumed death.
Gandalf's death was not in vain. Nor would he have you give up hope.
Like his father, Boromir wasn't a bad guy at all. He was just a desperate man who lost hope while trying to save his people. Many fans were quite annoyed by the film portrayal of Faramir. This is because it led to this kind of widespread assumption that Faramir is like Boromir light. That is, he's just another corrupt and greedy human who is eager for glory and power, and he only changes his mind at the 11th hour. However, the Faramir of the books is the polar opposite of Boromir. Through a combination of intelligent interrogation and Sam's inability to keep his mouth shut, he finds out that they are carrying a powerful weapon against Sauron, one that Boromir greatly desired for humanity to have. And when the Faramir of the books finds this out, he merely reiterates his promise to help the Hobbits out because he had made a vow, unlike Peter Jackson's version, who initially decides to turn them over to Dad to score some points. Not cool. At some point, it just became an unquestioned truth that Hobbit feet, along with being hairy and necessarily resilient, are disproportionately large. Like if you took a clown and magically turned his floppy clown shoes into exceptionally hairy feet, that's what Hobbit feet look like in the films. The truth is that Tolkien never wrote anything about Hobbit feet being particularly large. In Fellowship of the Ring, he wrote that Hobbit feet had, quote, tough leathery soles, and that they were, quote, clad in a thick curling hair, much like the hair of their heads. But he made no mention about their feet being particularly large. Sean Astin, who played Samwise Gamgee in Peter Jackson's adaptations, would likely have preferred a more faithful interpretation. In the A Day in the Life of a Hobbit special feature on the extended edition of Fellowship of the Ring, director Peter Jackson revealed that Astin, annoyed at the time it took to apply the Hobbit foot prosthetics, kept Jackson up to date on his personal tally of how many days the prosthetics were applied versus how many days the feet appeared in shots.
We have to be really honest and say that when the days that we don't have feet, we're really excited.
Partly due to the enduring popularity of The Lord of the Rings, elves remain a staple of high fantasy, and their physical appearance tends to follow specific rules. They're all stunningly beautiful creatures, with men and women sporting equally long and often blonde hair, and they have pointy ears. But Tolkien never wrote that blonde hair was a dominant feature of his elves. In fact, many of them, such as Elrond and Arwen, have black hair. Though Legolas is almost always portrayed as having blonde hair, Tolkien never actually describes his hair color. Legolas's father, Thranduil, however, is one of the few elves to explicitly be described as blonde. Tolkien also never wrote anything to the effect of elf men having the same straight long hair as women, so that a bunch of elf men and women together look like a line of actors waiting for a shampoo commercial audition. In fact, believe it or not, Tolkien never even wrote in any of his books that elf ears were pointy. Maybe he never meant for them to be thought of as pointy, or maybe he thought elves were common enough in legend and myth that the detail wasn't needed. Regardless, unless someone shows Tolkien's elves baking cookies and trees for Keebler or making toys for Santa, we can probably all agree they've gotten a pretty good deal in pop culture so far and don't have a lot to complain about. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.